I don't know which officers are there, but we're reconvening now just to give some feedback on the panels where we'd possibly like some further information to help us make a decision when you do your right of reply. As a result of the evidence we've heard, we don't require anything regarding the designations chapter. I think we've got enough information to have a deliberation and make our recommendation on that. Regarding the infrastructure chapter, we heard evidence from obviously Far North Holdings Limited, Mr. Smith, and they were going to provide some further information. We'd like to see, if possible, whether that easement they've got on referred to in these design guidelines for Narfar Park is actually something there recorded as an easement, or if it's stipulated clearly somewhere in the design guidelines. And also at the top, there was a bit missing. Mr. Smith did say he'd provide some information, but he hasn't done that yet.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I think we can probably clear up some of that already, and with the help of Mr. Wyatt, who helpfully was the reporting officer for the Narfar Special Purpose Zone or Innovation Zone. My discussions with Mr. Wyatt suggest that certainly those specific development sites that were identified, if there's indeed a 20-metre setback, would comply with the rule.
So yeah, we can provide confirmation of that as well.
Yeah, it's and you need to be at the top, even though Mr. Smith said, if that's the way we go, and I think we're possibly comfortable that they're a bit unique compared to anywhere else in that aspect. But that's because it's a special zone for one thing, and they've already got possibly this issue in place.
Thank you. And again, I would suggest also that given the tight control of the building platforms, the question that you might want to know is both where the line is in relation to the building sites at the top of irrespective of whether there's an easement or not.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that we may on balance recommend a range of options there. So for example, either exempt them or don't, or if there's any non-compliance with those building platforms, specifically deal with that. So we might come back to you with options on that.
Right. And continuing on with that critical electricity line, obviously we heard today, and we heard in our opinion very good submissions from the landowners, Farmer Mahoney. We'd like to consider have some information provided to us consider the options of whether just to map the line and refer to it as 33 kV and not refer to it as critical electricity line, and have something there spelling out that is covered by Electricity Act and also those other things that cover it at the moment. That's what we would like for our consideration. We know that what we've got at the moment is putting the full thing on. And whether you want to give us options and
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything?
Just make note about the rules or options, or it's just 10 kV line.
Yeah. You might have to tighten up the obviously reference to the Electricity Act and whatever the special and the standards. Yeah.
But just for some clarification, there were some discussions around what FNDC can do and not do in relation to whenua Māori. My understanding is that relates to property matters and not RM matters, and aren't directly, have no correlation with what we're dealing with currently, and actually wouldn't make a difference to Transpower in their existing lines and introducing theirs set of requirements through the national policy statement for electricity transmission. So
I think
I'll put that aside.
Yeah, agree entirely. And of course, there was a lot of discussion about the notification, and everybody wasn't notified and had the opportunity, and we just have to take that and we accept that. And it's unfortunate, but we're here now a year and a half later, and so those people have had the opportunity and possibly to come along in the back of those other submitters. So
you will probably look at, we'll do some more digging on that, but I just want to clarify that and make it crystal clear to the panel that that was omitted, but certainly what you are dealing with is a submission by Top Energy that we need to respond to.
Yep.
Right. So the letter was a courtesy, and essentially the purpose of that was to recognise the intent of the plan, but to bring people's attention to the submission of Top Energy.
Theoretically, you could have just put that submission out in summary form, and people would have had to pick up that their property was affected. Otherwise, nobody would have known. Possibly, I'm just saying that. But you've gone the next step and advised.
Correct.
Possibly some people. You're right.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
But we'll probably provide some commentary on that as well.
Have we got anything else on infrastructure?
Well,
I'm just.
I think one of the things that come out, particularly this morning, but over the last few days, is no justification for that 33 kV to be in the critical electricity line.
Oh,
Yeah, look, I think we've heard different things there. We've heard Top Energy have said something else. We've heard something from.
Yeah, I realise it's multiple, but we need that clarified. What is the justification?
I think in my opinion, it could be justified, the 33. I've got no doubt the RPS agreed those criteria.
Yeah.
I've got no doubt, but we probably hadn't heard what we've heard this morning, or possibly swaying the other way, that they will have just map it, but leave it to the Electrical Act and the thing.
It was the analysis around bringing critical electricity lines and as intended, which was 100 kV, 150 kV, but there hasn't been detailed analysis of whether it should just be 100
so
kV, so we've obviously provided one there.
Yeah, so that would be the options that, you provided to us and, the options and the implications of those options, which is the important part of it, yeah.
And the implications as described is the impacts, I suppose, on the property owner, whose land use, property rights, economic impact. And, some of those properties that were highlighted this morning, it's significant. But the other thing is the higher order stuff. So we've got the Electricity Act. And I just think we might have missed the point with Mary Land Court. I think what William Tarney was talking about was actually the Treaty Waitangi. It was lost in tree, a little bit, but I think he was actually, we have to refer to that as well under the current legislation.
And I think
Maori land rights.
I think he was thinking more, was he not referring more to they want to do upgrades or they want to put some new lines in?
There are a range of matters, Mr. Chair, I think that were referred to.
So if we just look at it as what higher order.
So I'll make it clear, there's no requirement to map electricity lines in the thing. It's more just is that an effective method to protect regionally significant infrastructure? That's kind of the question. So there's, it's not required. It's just is this an appropriate method to protect these lines?
Yeah.
And that's what we could be advised.
What Commissioner Watson had said was, well, do we map it but without?
Yeah.
But I don't think you want to be getting into the Treaty of Waitangi and Waitemari stuff. It's not.
I'm not sure where the
It's not
statutory basis would be either the RPS or any other provision to treat it differently in terms of protecting existing assets.
But the Electricity Act does protect it, and they all said it. It's been there for 40 years or whatever.
Yeah, and that's something that Mr. Wyeth will look at. But similarly, by putting those provisions on, it doesn't change the costs. There's probably one exception that we'll talk to you about, which will be probably the subdivision provisions. That we'll look at,
which is land use, yeah.
Yep, and the location of the building platforms in relation to those.
Well, some of Mr. McPhee accepted some of your recommendations. He accepted the one about subdivision as well, didn't he?
He's got some tweaks to that. So it would be if you comply with the NZPCP, which has no controls around subdivision, it's kind of a control activity. So it's really just addressing compliance with that, which that code doesn't do on itself. So essentially, I think the rules is just really enforcing compliance with those regulations, which I'm trying to make clear.
I thought McPhee summarised his evidence very well. He did quite summary and quite effectively. Yeah.
I think from my point of view, if you just the submitters, they don't want the CEL. They're quite happy with it as it is because that imposes another layer of restrictions on their land use, and they basically implied it's theft by stealth of their property rights. They didn't use those words, but
certainly we'll respond, but we would argue that actually that's no different to what already applies. There's no additional costs applied by provisions. accept what they're saying.
But isn't the impact of the wider, we're going at 32 metres around
No,
here?
we're not talking about that. We're talking about possibly the option of either we go with this, what's been suggested and do the full hog, or we just map the lines.
Yeah.
And leave it to the existing restrictions that are there now. And that they accepted. That's what we're talking about. We're not referring to the lines as critical energy.
No, well, that's
Just
what I was
referred-
getting at. But I don't want them to do that. But it's
No,
just-
well, we've got to get the option.
need to get that feedback from our planners.
You
Yeah.
know what you want, that's what we want.
We're not referring them to critical.
I'll say it again. I just want to check all the higher order stuff that already controls this. And if that's sufficient,
We're going
leave it
to
at that.
refer to 33 kV lines, not critical electrical lines. If we go
That's
that way, okay.
Look, absolutely, yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think, there's obviously other, we'll outline the cost benefits, particularly about being specific about where those might apply will be helpful. And I think Top Energy raised that yesterday about that less than that being expected, understanding where those provisions might apply.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Well, that's all right. No, that's all right.
Yeah, hold them in.
Kick me out. Kick me out. Come on.
No.
I've got things to do.
I'm just going to go down the list that we had a big. So if this is a transport issue, Melissa, so regarding the fire service, I mean, we believe, the carriageway should be 4 metres or whatever the driveway is, etc. Should probably be 4 metres at least. Not 2.5 to 4 or whatever it was, or 2 to 4 metres. So that's one thing. Where the gradient, I think you said was 22% in your office of the district plan, didn't you?
I can go back and check that, but I think it was a rollover gradient from the operative plan.
Yeah, well, so that's what we'd like, the option of having a look at that gradient that what's in the operative district plan and what you've put in this district plan for a gradient.
Mr. Chair, I think we might provide you a little bit more information because I don't actually think the 4 metre requirement actually reflects what is expected from the standard. I think the standard is much more complex than that.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Well, okay, at least 4 metres.
Well, no, potentially it's also around things like distances between hydrants and whether that is required, a 4 metre width is required.
Is that not in the engineering standards for fire hydrants or anything like that?
It's about where the development is located in accordance. So it will specify, for example, where the network might have that engineering standards and which we're looking to. Okay, so what we'll address that.
Yeah.
I think we accept that that's what you're interested in. I think we might provide you with a little bit more information about why that may or may not be necessary in our view as a response.
Yeah, okay, right, thank you. The hospital parking, we heard from Miss Hamilton, Miss Fowler, I think it was. And I know the parking is going to disappear altogether, but then they come down to that whether they should have to do a integrated transport assessment. And we don't believe at this stage that it should apply to the 3 hospital only sites. There's only 3 hospital zone sites, and we don't think they should have to provide an ITA. But that's our thinking at the moment. So we'd like you to consider that.
Am I able to provide an initial comment on that now?
Yeah,
is that something you'd like me to?
yeah.
I just, I think there were a couple of things, particularly coming out of the question from Commissioner Watson yesterday about why should a hospital be treated any differently to other activities, and could any other activities mount a similar kind of argument? And I think the example provided by Mrs. Hamilton is actually really relevant in terms of the education sector. A lot of the arguments for hospitals being a really special case are, in my view, almost exactly applicable to the education sector in terms of they receive central government funding, their taxpayer funding. They're both sectors that are really under pressure financially. Their land resources are scarce and valuable where they exist. There is very little option for you to choose whether or not you visit a school. The schools, children are required to attend, especially sort of primary and secondary education. And there's little option or choice as to when those trips are made. That's sort of, the need is you go when you are required to be at school in the same sort of way as you go to a hospital when you need to go to a hospital. And so the sort of want versus need argument in terms of why hospitals are really the special case, I think that's something that I'm going to explore in my right of reply, because I think there is a concern from my perspective that making an exemption just for hospitals, the traffic generated from a hospital is going to be there regardless of whether an ITA is prepared or not, but the ITA actually gives you that baseline information to understand, do upgrades need to happen to the adjacent road? It doesn't necessarily mean the hospital would fit the bill for that, but without that information, when a major hospital upgrade is happening, you can't understand what infrastructure is actually needed to support that upgrade. So those are some of the things that I'm going to be exploring, as opposed to maybe just a more surface level consideration that it's only 3 sites and what does it matter?
Well, it's not just that, it's also the education department haven't put in for an exemption, so that's one thing. The other thing is, having delivered my granddaughters to school over the last quite a lot of years, I know what schools are significantly worse than going to a hospital. I mean, in the morning, every school site you go to, the traffic's horrendous. When you go and pick them up in the afternoon, they're horrendous. Doesn't matter whether it's urban area or rural area, but that's just my observation. I think,
Mr. Chair, I think it comes down to essentially as well, if there is a risk and we've got 3 discrete sites to consider, who therefore pays for it? Does it come instead, in the spirit of the Act, the person who generates effects are the ones who are required to internalise them, or is it essentially the local council, which is the last person standing, who might need to remedy those off-site effects?
and in the local council is made up of the people who go to the hospital. Most of the time up here, probably you get very few people probably come up here to go to hospital. So they're probably more localised and looking after the ratepayers or taxpayers who live up here. But that's what we'd like to have a look at.
No, we're clear on it. Thank you.
Any change on that?
No, just thinking, James, you can see where the battle is.
Hearts and minds through the chair, hearts and minds.
Regarding the
With the flow receiving evidence, no.
He loaded the gun. He's just providing just shooting the bullets.
regarding I think it was the supermarket foodstuffs, wasn't it? They wanted to increase to 750 square meters, and I think you accepted that. So we're thinking that's
No, definitely not accepting that one.
Oh, you weren't? Okay.
No.
Okay.
I've actually invited Mr. Collins back this morning to speak to that. It potentially would have been better to have had Mr. Collins speak yesterday while Mr. Hills was also in the room. But I think the foodstuffs, there were a few minor wording changes I'd accepted that Mr. Badham had put forward with respect to foodstuffs. But in terms of the trip generation, I think there were a couple of things that were put forward by Mr. Badham and Mr. Hills that maybe require a little bit of a deeper look, particularly the assertion that somehow the threshold of 200 square metres for supermarkets is an outlier nationally and is proportionately very low compared to other councils. And they've used the examples of Auckland and Whangarei to sort of highlight that, but they've cherry-picked 2. And I might throw to Mr. Collins now just to provide some more context onto why he'd refute some of
Just comment there. I don't think comparing with Auckland probably different. Comparing Whangarei is very a good idea in my view. And if there's 750, I think you'd have to have good just.
There are also 880,000 people, Mr. Chair.
I understand that, but you're going to become a tier 3 as soon as it's the same as them shortly.
I think
anyway,
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins has got a little bit more context as to where the Whangarei number came from. And I think what we heard yesterday from Mr. Hills is that trip generation is maybe a little bit more of a dark art in terms of picking a threshold number. And there is some context as to how the Whangarei number came about. So I'll pass you on to Mr. Collins now.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Good afternoon, panel. Good to see you again. So I will provide a little bit more detail, a detailed response on this matter through Ms. Pearson. But yeah, just appreciate the opportunity just to give a bit of context to the Whangarei and Auckland thresholds. So I think the key thing for me anyway is that Mr. Hills doesn't dispute the trip generation rate that we've used to set the threshold in the proposed district plan of 200 square metres. So that threshold is based on 40 vehicle movements per hour and or 200 vehicle movements per day. And we have used that threshold, or we have used that quantum of vehicle trip generation to set all of the thresholds in the proposed district plan. So we're not treating supermarkets any different to any other activity in the proposed district plan. So that's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is that the threshold of 200 square metres is consistent with a range of other district plans within the country. So we've got the Wellington district plan, which is currently an appeals version. I don't know if any appeals relate to the trip generation rule in the Wellington district plan, but that uses a threshold of 200 light vehicle movements per day to at which point an ITA is required. So that's entirely consistent with the approach for the proposed Far North plan. The Selwyn district plan uses a threshold of 250 square metres for supermarkets and a second threshold of 950 square metres. So Mr. Hills talked yesterday very briefly about how the Whangarei plan uses a two-tiered approach. The proposed Far North district plan doesn't. It uses a one-tier approach, but the Selwyn plan has that two-tier approach. The proposed Waimakariri district plan, which has been through hearings, but hasn't been a decision on that yet, that uses a threshold of 250 vehicle movements per day. So that's slightly higher than what we've used for the Far North plan. We've used 200, Waimakariri has used 250. And there's also the proposed Timaru district plan, which has also recently been through hearings. I'm not sure if there's a decision on it yet, but it uses thresholds of 200 square metres and 800 square metres for that two-tiered approach to the ITA. So consistent with the Far North plan, albeit the Far North plan is just using a single-tiered approach. So I think from that gives you some context to other quite recent district plans around the country. And then in terms of the Auckland, oh, sorry, was there a question?
Carry on. No, carry on. Yeah, correct.
In terms of the Auckland unitary plan, so as Mr. Hills noted that it has a threshold of, I think, 1,666 square metres for retail or commercial activity. The reason that that threshold is quite a lot higher is one, Auckland uses the threshold in Auckland for an ITA is 100 vehicles per hour versus the 40 vehicles per hour that we're using in Far North. And I think, you know, to a degree that can be related to the scale of Auckland, the number of people there, the level of existing congestion, etc. But the other reason that that threshold is so high is Auckland uses quite broad categories for each activity, and so the activity which supermarkets sit in includes quite low trip generating activities like bulk retail, big box retail, and activities like that that have a much lower trip generation rate. So I see that 1,600 square metres or so threshold as being they've had to put that at a suitable level that it covers quite a wide scale of activities. Whereas for the Far North plan, we've been quite specific and given a more finer grained approach to the ITA threshold, a finer grained approach to the activities listed in the thresholds. And finally, with the Whangarei district plan, the notified version, or as the decisions version of the Whangarei district plan had ITA thresholds based on the number of car parks. So they had a threshold of 50 car parks and 100 car parks as a two-tiered approach for when an ITA is required. Through appeals to the Environment Court, we ended up with the district plan, the Whangarei district plan that we have now. I am not entirely sure how they have reached the 750 GFA for supermarkets, but my understanding is that through those appeals, it was switched from a car park metric to a GFA metric. And the process that they took to make that switch was they basically reversed engineered it and looked at what the minimum parking requirement was for supermarkets, and then backworked how many the GFA of a supermarket that would require 50 car parks. So I actually, in my view, Whangarei is a bit of an outlier in that sense versus some of the more recent plans that I've listed out to you that are consistent with what we're putting forward for the Far North plan.
Yep. Mr. McNally has a question.
Thanks, Mr. Collins. The discussion we're looking at, you've got different metrics. You're saying a gross floor area, vehicle movements, trip generation, vehicles per hour, car parks. And obviously the submitters are wanting to increase it from 200 gross floor area to 750. Have we got information, any information that relates to our existing supermarkets? Got a couple in Kaitāia, a couple in 3 in Kerikeri. There's Kaitāia.
Yeah, it's a good question, Commissioner McNally. The thresholds that we've set in the Far North plan are based on industry guidance, which was released by NZTA. It was actually a research report that Aberley, the consulting company I work for, prepared for NZTA, and it's widely accepted across the industry as a good reference for standardised trip rates. It's the reference that's been used, or the reference document that's been used in all of the other district plans that I mentioned to you. We don't have specific survey data for the Far North. That could be sourced, but that would be quite a labour-intensive process because there's quite a bit of variation in traffic generation on a daily basis. Of course, you have peaks and troughs, but there's also quite a seasonal relationship to that as well. Certainly,
okay, just rather than worry about the traffic movements, why don't we just focus on, because they've looked at gross floor area, why don't we just, what are the current gross floor areas of those supermarkets? That must be on file in the property department.
I think that was actually provided potentially at the beginning of Mr. Badham's evidence. I think he started with a summary in his actual evidence statement. If you give me a moment, I'll pull that up and check.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Steve,
I missed it.
yeah, Steve's point is very valid though. I mean, there's a lot of variables in terms of sorting it out. And if we're looking at what Timaru are doing and what Wellington's doing and Ekatahuna, I mean, surely we've got some information relating to Far North and the patterns that are involved in the Far North. If there's 3 supermarkets here now, what are the traffic generating capacities of those? What are the implications of 200 square metres, 300, 400, for example? Seems to me that we're getting information that's not really directly relevant to the properties that we're looking at.
I think, Mr. Chair, what we're looking at is a starting point to consider effects.
Yep.
We're not. Yeah, I think if you go back to looking at what we've got now and assume that treatment wasn't required to get it to a point that it is now, I mean, it could be telling you anything. What I think the point of the provision is to assess suitability of the roading network, right? And so I think just keep in mind the purpose of the provision. I certainly hear what you're saying, and I think we're perhaps trying to retrofit something that is not really within the purpose of the provision then.
I think what you've got to do is come back with your response and we'll deal with it. We'll have a look at what you respond to and we'll deal with it accordingly. But our initial thoughts were that at 250, 200 is too low. So anyway, we'll wait until we get a response from you on your justification.
Sure.
Haven't had the evidence.
And I would just reiterate, and this was something that came through in the submissions, is that there seemed to be an assumption that the threshold set was somehow a threshold that told you if the extension was appropriate or not, in terms of whether you'd approve or decline a consent application. And that is not the purpose of the trip generation rule. It is a trigger for when you would look and prepare that ITA assessment. And then the findings of that ITA assessment help inform, is the design appropriate? Are the roads going to be up to capacity? You know, can you approve it? So it's not, I guess, a gateway, like a yes or no gateway as to whether or not you'd say yes to a supermarket or not. It's simply a threshold where you seek more information to check that the extension isn't going to really adversely affect your surrounding road network.
So then my response to that would be then the submitter wants it to go to 750 so they don't have to do an ITA.
Yes, correct.
Okay, well, I think we've had enough on that one.
The context is obviously that there will be, under tier 3, there will be increased pressure on who provides parking, whether that's the public or whether that's the private person.
Be parking on the street.
So there may be some, it may actually become more relevant in the near future, or more appropriate to consider those matters very shortly.
Well, you can come back to us, response, and we'll deal with it accordingly.
Could I just add a final little bit of context to that?
Yeah.
So just for the panel's information, Mr. Hills agreed with the trip generation rate that I had used. So based on that trip generation rate, 750 square metres of supermarket would be expected to generate around 130 vehicle movements per hour.
Okay, thank you. I've noted that. Thank you very much. Right, now we've got the submission.
More roads in Kerikeri.
We've got the submission from Kiwi Rail, which basically agreed with, I think, nearly everything you said. The only issue that we've got is whether we possibly, at this stage, have a view that those words that they wanted crossed out should be crossed out, and should finish it I think the word signs. So that's the way we're thinking at the moment. But do you want to respond to that, or do you want to leave it till you respond?
Sorry, just to clarify, is that going beyond just deleting the note that they've requested?
Oh, no, I don't think you're deleting the note. I think they just wanted it to apply to all railway crossings, whether it's got a barrier arm or not.
I think because the relief they're requesting is to delete the note, and if the note is deleted, then the scope of the provision applies to all railway crossings, barrier arms, no barrier arms. So I think we're in agreement with Kiwi Rail that we can make sure that it applies to both.
Okay, thank you. Forest and Bird, we're going to wait for the officer's response on that. We haven't got a view at this stage, so okay, so we got Forest. Again, fairly straightforward. I think they agree virtually with the officers, so we've got no issues there. We'll just wait and see what your right to reply comes back. Renewable energy and wind farms. Now, at the moment, I think Mr. Badham wants not just in rural areas, he wants it in all areas. And of course, I asked the question, do you mean all areas? And he said, I think he didn't mean all areas, but he didn't give so we probably would like some information on, if we're going to allow it, which zones it should be allowed in. And so the rural area, I mean, we don't believe it should be in places like Russell Township, the heritage zone. I mean, there's some outstanding natural landscape areas, probably there's other areas. So whoever can report back on that and justify what zones it should and shouldn't go in. We thought about the horticultural zone, is it? But there again, that's good land.
Yeah.
You want to put them on there. So we'd like some information on, rather than stipulate where it won't go, stipulate where it will go or could go.
Yeah, look, Mr. Chair, we have done some thinking about that, and there are some tweaking potentially around, for example, multi-purpose rural. where
If they agree.
it might be, well, not necessarily if they agree. I would anticipate that they will develop projects
Oh, right,
on
okay.
their own accord.
Right, okay.
And it would probably be unreasonable to preclude that.
Yep.
Our initial thinking is probably that industrial zones are, while that might have amenity considerations that might make them amenable, we also need industrial land for industrial uses for the workings of our communities. And that perhaps it wouldn't necessarily be ideal in those or mixed use locations. Mixed use, obviously, there's going to be some conflict of uses potentially at a large scale. And we do need industrial resource, land resource, which can be difficult to provide. So,
But it's not viable.
Pardon?
Commercially, it's not viable to put large scale solar farms in industrial land or mixed use lands. You know, that's why they seek rural areas.
Yeah, market values.
People,
Yeah.
and also because the land's cheap at least.
Well, so we definitely don't want an heavy zone.
Yeah.
And you can understand why.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we recognise that it was probably a little bit absolute and probably unintended in a way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else? No? No?
It's just the overlays in relation to that as well, wasn't it?
I don't know where, I've got monitoring masts down, but I can't remember what
The height, there was a
80 metres, isn't it? And for 5 years.
5 years, yep. Long, thin structure.
I'll show you some images of play.
Yeah.
But they do, their technology does come up to 80 meters. It's like 30, 50 meters. And
And what do they use for then? What are the
monitoring ones, you need to get up to that sort of
Yeah.
level of height.
Anemometers mainly. Yeah.
Get to do it for so long, for 4 years?
5 years?
Sure.
Yeah, seasonally, yeah, they do like to do consistent monitoring. You get windy years, you get years that aren't windy. So I think, yeah, it probably would be necessary.
Anyway, just,
Advice on it, yeah, but I'm saying that's based off other comparable district plans.
oh, well, if you tell us that, if you don't mind.
Now, the overlays was
Tell us
just,
what they've done in Timaru.
if you're looking at a wind farm, some of the best spots are probably on our coastal areas, but we've got also overlays in there. And how do we deal with that?
Yeah, the EPS actually outlines where we can be appropriately restrictive and where we can't. We've obviously also got NZCPS that tells us those things.
Okay.
All right.
Like questions apply.
And then we had, we've got Kaitāia drainage issues and
Oh, yes.
how to deal with that. We didn't know whether there should be a rule built into the district plan somewhere that they can't build within 10 metres, or they're gonna have 10 metres either side of these drainage things. A lot of the information should be passed on to the engineering department. That's probably one of the things we recommend, but, or whether it goes in the engineering standards.
Look, we've provided you with the provisions and my quick read of the provisions. And so the scope for review of the bylaw has just about everything in there that they requested. I'm a little bit, we also understand that there's climate change and other factors that could also be affecting some of the flows and flooding and things like that as well. Our understanding and Kaitāia through the HBA is that it's not hugely significant. I acknowledge too that if we have it in the plan, the best time to pick it up is a building consent stage, but it was also noted that there is increasingly large buildings. I think it's almost 110 metre squared farm building that you can produce without a building consent. So we wouldn't have control there. The thing that, so there's pluses and minuses for each. I'm not sure how much better outcome you're going to get through the district plan than you would through the bylaw. We do have enforcement officers charged with monitoring bylaws.
Yeah.
But we'll review that and give you a response on it.
I think it's important, obviously, you've got 2 community board members came along and Mrs. King, so I think it's important that we give a good response to them, and if we can't put it in, we have to direct them where to go.
Yeah, and certainly, no, we can't do that, sir.
No.
I would suggest too that, like, as part of certainly their role and as community board members is to advocate for funding to council through its annual plan, the long-term plan, to resource the monitoring and enforcement of bylaws. So I would, yeah, we would encourage them to speak to the decision makers on that funding, because it seems to me like things were going relatively okay until
6 years ago.
6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Until there was a change. And as I say, there may be other things that are happening in our environment that might also be impacting on their impression of what the issues are as well. Notwithstanding that they have identified areas or buildings that don't comply.
Do you want to, wait a minute, Steve, Alan, do you want to carry on from that? Because we did talk about possibly having a rule in the district,
I tend to the view that we don't have anything in the plan on it, quite honestly, but I mean, it would be a matter of how we deal with the submitters respectfully and respectfully, and
Absolutely.
it's a matter of sending that information on to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, sorry?
Yeah, I just think, I would prefer that we don't confuse the maintenance of the drains, which are the bylaw provisions, with the issue that was presented. And what the Mrs. King was talking about particularly was the land use change and the development impact on that drainage, so the downstream impacts. And that's probably in the engineering standards already. We've spoken about it somewhere before. But is there any way under this plan process, we can at least map the drainage area? Or similar to the critical lines, this is an area
Not a
that,
critical line.
yeah, I know. Now,
Do you want it to be a critical line? No.
no, but they're wanting to do that. But how do we, it could be as simple as it's a note to the planners, make sure that any land use change in the drainage districts up here notes the requirement 10 metre setbacks off drains and things, because that's not shown on plans.
Yeah.
It's not shown on titles.
As I say, like the provisions about managing planting, managing the location of buildings.
Yeah, it's all in the bylaws. I've read it.
All in the bylaws.
Yeah.
So they are the, we'll look at it.
Well, our discussion last night, I said, the best thing you do is put someone that didn't really give a shit about too many people and get them to go and clean the drains with a 12-ton digger. And to do that, they're going to have to pull out shelter belts, avocados, orchards within a 10 metre strip. Just pull them all out and throw them in the orchard. That'll get everyone's attention, but it's going to cause a few court cases.
Look,
So don't think that's the answer.
Look, I would suggest, Commissioner McNally, that this is not the first jurisdiction I've worked in where the recent monitoring and enforcement of drainage area bylaws is an issue.
So it's about empowering that. Okay. But there's got to be another way to somehow make sure everybody knows about it.
Yeah, certainly the district plan cannot require people to maintain them, or we can only kind of manage those issues.
No, all I wanted that they understood this is a drain that looks after an entire area and the downstream impacts. So you can't block it, you can't culvert it, can't grow shit within a certain area.
Those drains are nowhere on the council system. In the GIS.
Provided by.
Are they in the GIS system?
We'll have a think. There may be a non-statutory layer that we might consider. As I say, like it's not clear to me exactly where we can add value in some areas.
Yeah.
But I accept that making sure turning people's minds to the bylaw, whether we require compliance with it or not, I'm probably pretty reluctant to consider that. However, if we turn people's minds to it, but similarly, we don't want a lot of notes through the plan, I think is a consistent. We'll work through the issues.
Yeah.
It's in the back to us.
It's a matter, if you get a processing planner doing a resource consent up there, if they're not aware of these drainage areas, they probably don't even look at it, possibly.
I would suspect that they are fairly aware.
Are they? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would say that they'll certainly look at it. And I would suspect that a lot of them are probably covered by a flooding layer as well, is my gut feeling.
All right, okay. Well, anyway, have a look and come back and then we can reassess it.
Pastoral farming going into avocados wouldn't trigger resource consent anyway.
No, yeah.
Structures might.
Yeah. Okay, well, you have a look at it and come back to us.
Thank you.
Anything else? I don't think I've got anything else written down.
No, I've run out of plan.
Otherwise, we're just going to wait until your right of replies comes through, unless you want to give, have you got any issues that you would like some guidance where we're thinking already, or you're not?
I think you probably hit a lot of them. just looking through here.
And even the staff who are online, if you've got anything, just please speak up.
Yeah, certainly. But I think one of the key issues around both infrastructure and REG was some of the language that Top Energy was saying about whether the effects mitigation hierarchy was open to us. We're firmly of the view that that's the case, and the words, for example, no more than minor, is actually explicitly in the RPS. So we'll be giving you that, and we're still firmly of the view that a should is not a must, and the current case law suggests that that's the more robust language to use, and we've been consistent in that, and certainly Kenton has been consistent in his advice on that. Is there anything, I'm thinking Ms. Pearson, around the FENS code of practice that you wanted to respond to? We've had a brief discussion on that.
Thanks, James. I think it was more, I joined, I think, at the end of the summing up of the questions on the infrastructure chapter. So I didn't hear if there was any direction or position from the panel on whether or not, or the degree to which that code of practice is referenced in either the transport chapter or more broadly, because I think that's obviously an area that we've heard this week that as a planning team we need to go away and look at that, as it is referenced in multiple chapters, and is it appropriate to do so in all of them, some of them, or yeah, so just whether there was any direction from the panel on that.
Firefighting water supply code practice.
Well, it happens
Yes,
now. Yeah, it happens now. So I think, yeah, why would you take it out?
And just a consistent reference to it, if it's going to be used throughout the plan, just a consistent reference rather than sort of variable comments about it. And as Bill said, it's in there now. And I mean, I just think some of the fire service provisions are relevant for the district plan. I mean, the district plan, if it's going to pick up on some things, that's certainly going to be something that should look at.
As I said, it's going to be a bigger issue for natural hazards, which is coming up so soon.
Kenton, have you got anything else specifically?
Not really. Just to note that the recommended wind generation rule didn't just relate to the rural production zone, also related to the multi-purpose and the open space zone. But we take your point that we'll look at if it should apply to any other zone. So yeah, that's all from me.
Kenton.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. McNally's going to raise a couple of issues.
Just in the submitted material that didn't appear, other than Gary Stanners, there was a couple of things about corrections. They look pretty straightforward in Kaitāia and NAFA. I think it was designations. To do with power lines, the Kaitāia Marae talked about power line impact on land use down Okahu Road, just up here. Mr. Badham spoke about McDonald's restaurants and traffic movements, vehicle crossings, mainly vehicle crossings in that one, I think. And then Waiau Bay Farm, they talked about, it was to do with the transport. They're going to bring it up again in the special purpose zone. Mr. McPhee was representing Waipapa Pine, and he was talking about access on State Highway 10. So it was NZ, it was basically the, what do you call it? Something access roads, LAR and State Highway access, I think, impact.
Ms. Pearson, I think you dealt with that yesterday, didn't you? You're going to slightly alter the...
In a slightly different way. So Mr. McPhee was suggesting on behalf of Waipapa Pine that the activity status of Tran R9 should be controlled so that the council didn't have the ability to decline a consent application for an access onto a state highway. Mr. Badham, in his evidence, was accepting that restricted discretionary is appropriate, so that if there is an issue raised by NZTA that they're not accepting that the crossing place onto the state highway or limited access road is appropriate, then council can decline the associated resource consent application, whereas a controlled activity status wouldn't do that. So I think yesterday Mr. Badham sort of said, look, I've put forward restricted discretionary, but I could see you could make an argument for controlled, but where I'm leaning to with my position is retaining it as restricted discretionary, but making it really, my change is fixing up and making it really clear that Tran R2 doesn't capture crossings onto state highways. So I'll get rid of the reference to state highways in that rule. So it is just Tran R9 that will deal with crossings to state highways. The other part of Tran R9 that didn't get discussed yesterday but was raised by, again, I think it was McDonald's and Waipapa Pine, was about the reference to Tran S2, which is the standard that controls how many crossings you can have, which frontages to a site you can put your crossings on, site distances, separation distances from intersections, that kind of thing. It was Mr. Badham's position yesterday that that standard should also not apply to state highway crossings, basically let NZTA dictate what they want for crossings, and that non-compliance with that standard shouldn't kick the activity status into discretionary. So that's an area that I'm actively considering. It didn't come up really in the discussion yesterday, but it's definitely on my radar to discuss further with Mr. Collins and have another look at that.
Yeah, and then NZTA supported the way the council does it, because it's a partnership, so it gives them opportunity to. And having been involved in some of those in the past, you're an idiot if you don't go to NZTA first.
Yeah, and I think the point with the controlled activity status is that the partnership doesn't really work, in my view, if the activity status is controlled, because NZTA could, the resource consent process is the vehicle as such for bringing the council view and NZTA together, as opposed to those processes happening independently and getting situations where the land use consent's approved but NZTA says no. So the resource consent pulls those two things together, but if the activity status is controlled, then the land use consent has to be granted anyway, even if NZTA has a fundamental problem. And so restricted discretionary allows those two things to be considered together, and overall the application declined if there is a really significant issue with the access.
Okay.
All right.
Ms. Mayor, you've got a new military corrections designation was given out in the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, I just brought it up in case we missed it as commissioners, that's all.
And I'll just go back to the wind farms. Whatever zones we're not going to allow it in, our view is they should be non-compliant. I thought prohibited last night, but I got directed otherwise.
Advised otherwise.
So we're talking about zones there, not overlays. So the overlays might deal with the prohibited.
Oh yeah, well yeah, we'd be yeah, I can understand them being prohibited in Russell. Yeah. You might not be able to justify that. Huh?
Could do one with a heritage theme. A lattice tower with a heritage theme to it. That was
The
like
coastal environment. Outstanding landscape.
Anything else, Kenton or Miss Pearson?
We
Not for
do
me,
there.
thanks.
Oh, good, thanks.
There was an extension to an existing designation that was processed after notification that will furnish you with at some stage that will be brought into the decisions.
designations is getting more difficult.
So look, that's essentially the extent. We'll just provide you with that, and it will go into the amended schedule.
Okay,
Cool.
okay, that's right. Yeah. We're just going to refuse them all.
Yeah, want to keep us busy for a long time.
Yeah, we've got blue and black pens at the minute. Be very afraid if we ride with red ones.
If there's nothing else, no, if there's nothing else, we'll close the hearing and with a karakia, and thank you everybody for your attendance.
Turuki whakataha, whakairia, te wānanga, kia wātia, aira, kua wātia, hui tākie. Set aside the mahi, suspend the wānanga to free us to continue on with the day. Yay, thank you. I will stop the recording.
Thank you. Okay.